March 23, 1945, a forward observation post near the Rhine River. The German artillery spotter raised his binoculars, scanning the American positions across the valley. What he saw made his blood run cold. Hundreds of tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery pieces, an entire armored division preparing to cross the Rhine. He immediately radioed coordinates to German headquarters. Within minutes, German artillery began pounding the American positions. Shells rained down for hours. When the smoke cleared and German reconnaissance planes flew over at dawn, they photographed the devastation. Destroyed tanks littered the landscape. Equipment burned. The American armored division decimated. Except none of it was real. The tanks were rubber inflatables. The artillery pieces were wooden props. The entire division was 23 artists, designers, and sound engineers, with trucks full of equipment and imagination. The German spotter had been fooled by America's most classified unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known today as the Ghost Army. What he didn't know was that while he watched rubber tanks, real American forces were crossing the Rhine 15 miles north, facing almost no resistance, because German artillery was firing at ghosts. The Ghost Army's origin began in early 1944 at Camp Forest, Tennessee, a radical idea that would have seemed absurd in any previous war. What if deception could be industrialized? What if an entire military unit existed solely to trick the enemy? The concept emerged from British experience in North Africa, where Colonel Dudley Clark's small deception unit used dummy tanks and false radio traffic to mislead Rommel. During the Battle of El Alamein in 1942, Montgomery concentrated his real armor in the north, while dummy positions in the south drew German attention. American planners recognized the potential. In January 1944, the War Department authorized the creation of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit of 1,100 men organized into 4 specialized companies. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers, Visual Deception with Inflatables and Props. Signal Company Special, Sonic Deception using recorded tank engine sounds. Signal Company, False Radio Traffic mimicking real divisions, Security Detachment, Operational Secrecy, recruitment targeted men with unusual skills for soldiers. The Army scoured art schools, advertising agencies, design firms, and entertainment companies. They wanted painters who could create convincing camouflage, set designers who understood distance perspective, sound engineers who could manipulate audio, fashion illustrators who grasped visual psychology, and advertising men who knew how to sell a lie. Among them, Private First Class Bill Blass, future fashion icon, Corporal Ellsworth Kelly, renowned abstract painter, Staff Sergeant Arthur Shilstone, National Geographic illustrator, Private First Class Art Kane, legendary photographer. These were not typical combat soldiers. They were artists conscripted into an extraordinary mission to paint, build, and perform their way across Europe. Training at Camp Forest bore little resemblance to standard military preparation. Instead of marching drills, they studied theatrical techniques, how objects appeared at distance, rapid assembly of inflatables, and mimicking the behavior of real armored divisions. The sonic deception system was ingenious. Engineers recorded actual Sherman tanks moving, halting, shifting gears, plus bridge construction, hammering, sawing, and supply trucks rumbling. These sounds were pressed onto 16-inch transcription discs. The visual deceptions were equally sophisticated. Each inflatable Sherman tank weighed 95 pounds and inflated in 15 minutes. When camouflaged and positioned, they were indistinguishable from real tanks beyond 300 yards. The unit created not just tanks, but self-propelled guns, trucks, artillery, and reconnaissance vehicles, all painted with authentic weathering. Mud splashes, track marks, exhaust stains. They understood that authenticity resided in small details. Real tank units left specific mud patterns, positioned vehicles tactically, and posted sentries at intervals. The Ghost Army arrived in France in June 1944. Their first mission, Operation Elephant, convinced German intelligence the U.S. Ninth Army was elsewhere. Near Brest, they transformed empty fields into a convincing armored headquarters. Inflatable tanks in neat rows, dummy artillery pointing toward German lines, radio operators broadcasting false traffic using real division call signs. Soldiers wore the patches of the units they impersonated, drank in cafes mentioning their fictional division, and drove marked jeeps through villages. At night, sonic trucks played recordings of tank movements. German listening posts heard exactly what they expected: an armored division moving into position. Intelligence reports reflected this. German artillery focused on the Ghost Army's position, while real American forces operated elsewhere with reduced enemy attention. Operation Elephant succeeded beyond expectations. By March 1945, the Ghost Army had conducted 15 deception operations across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, protecting troop movements, drawing enemy fire, and creating phantom armies. But their most critical mission approached: Operation Viersen. The Allied advance had reached the Rhine, Germany's last major natural barrier. Field Marshal Montgomery planned a massive crossing near Wesel in the north. To succeed, the Germans had to look somewhere else. The Ghost Army's orders: simulate the U.S. 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions preparing to cross 15 miles south at Viersen and Dulken. They had less than 5 days to create an illusion that would fool German commanders expecting a crossing attempt. On March 18th, they deployed their full arsenal. Sonic trucks played recordings of bridge construction, hammering, sawing, welding, heavy machinery, exactly what engineers would produce during river crossing prep. Visual dissection operated at unprecedented scale. Dummy supply dumps with stacked crates, inflatable tanks in assembly areas, fake anti-aircraft positions suggesting expected air attacks. Radio deception transmitted hundreds of messages daily, mimicking real division logistics requests for bridge materials and assault boats. German signals intelligence heard exactly what they expected: 2 American divisions preparing to force a Rhine crossing. Performance details sold the illusion. Jeeps drove back and forth, creating dust clouds. Communication wire was laid from HQ to forward positions. Military police directed traffic with signs. Laundry lines with drying uniforms suggested troops camped nearby. Sergeant Harold Dahl, a commercial artist from Minnesota, spent March 19th painting realistic mud patterns on inflatables. He knew German observers with binoculars would notice if tanks looked too clean. Real tanks accumulated specific mud patterns, treads through mud in particular ways, exhaust-stained rear panels. These details mattered enormously. Private Jack Macy, a New York designer, operated a sonic truck. He later recalled the tension, sitting in darkness playing construction noise, knowing German artillery might open fire at any moment. The trucks were vulnerable. If Germans spotted them and realized the sounds were recordings, the entire deception would collapse. Worse, a direct hit on a truck full of flammable transcription disks would be catastrophic. German response confirmed the deception was working. Reconnaissance planes photographed dummy positions repeatedly. Artillery fired harassment rounds at false assembly areas. Post-war intelligence reports showed Wehrmacht officers convinced the Americans planned to cross at Viersen. On the night of March 23rd, while the Ghost Army maintained its performance at Viersen, Montgomery's real forces crossed the Rhine at Wesel. Supported by the largest airborne drop since D-Day, thousands of troops crossed with significantly less resistance because German artillery batteries were positioned to oppose the crossing that never came. The Ghost Army maintained the deception for 2 additional days, preventing German commanders from repositioning forces once they realized they'd been fooled. Operation Viersen succeeded brilliantly, but the Ghost Army's missions involved genuine danger. These were not soldiers safely behind lines. They operated in forward areas, often within German artillery range, sometimes ahead of actual combat units. The unit suffered casualties. Several men were killed by German artillery fire directed at dummy positions. Others were wounded by mines while positioning equipment. Private First Class Bob Tompkins, a Pennsylvania illustrator, kept a detailed diary. On March 20th, 1945, he wrote about German shells landing near their Viersen positions. The team faced a harrowing choice: abandon the deception or maintain it despite incoming fire. Moving might reveal they weren't a real combat unit. Staying risked death. Rubber tanks offered no protection, but artillery killed men just as effectively as steel ones. Secrecy compounded the burden. Ghost Army soldiers could not tell anyone outside the unit about their mission. When they rotated home after the war, they were sworn to silence. The classification remained in effect for decades. These men, who had saved countless American lives, could not share their experiences with family, explain what they'd done, or receive recognition. The deception required theatrical discipline. Every soldier had to remain in character constantly. A single mistake, one wrong unit patch, one incorrect radio call sign, one sonic truck malfunction could expose the entire operation. The pressure to maintain perfect consistency for days was mentally exhausting. Between June 1944 and March 1945, the Ghost Army conducted 21 major deception operations, impersonating more than a dozen divisions across 4 countries. Estimates suggest their deception saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives by drawing enemy fire away from real combat operations. Yet the unit received no public recognition. Operations remained classified. Records were sealed. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, the unit was deactivated. Soldiers returned home under orders never to discuss their service. Inflatable tanks, sound trucks, and recording equipment were stored or destroyed. For nearly 50 years, the Ghost Army remained unknown. The men went on with their lives, many becoming successful in art, design, and entertainment, but they could not tell anyone they'd helped win the war through imagination and artistic skill. The classification began lifting in the 1990s. Researchers accessed operational records. Veterans, now in their 70s, finally received permission to discuss their service. In 2013, the Ghost Army was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of America's highest civilian honors. Many original veterans attended the ceremony, receiving recognition they'd deserved since 1945. The story reveals profound truths about modern warfare. Victory does not depend solely on firepower and numbers. Deception, psychology, and creativity can be decisive force multipliers. a small unit with inflatable tanks and sound recordings, achieved strategic effects that required no bullets, caused no enemy deaths, yet saved thousands of Allied lives. The Ghost Army succeeded because they understood their audience. German intelligence officers expected American forces to behave in specific ways. The Ghost Army provided exactly the evidence those officers expected to see and hear, exploiting assumptions and confirmation bias. The human element made the deception work. Artists who understood visual composition, set designers who knew how scenes appeared from distance, sound engineers who grasped auditory psychology. They applied theatrical principles to military problems, creating believable illusions for an audience that could not be allowed to realize they were watching a performance. The German artillery spotter near Viersen never knew he'd been fooled. He filed accurate reports about what he observed: an American armored division preparing to cross the Rhine. His commanders made tactical decisions based on that intelligence. German artillery fired thousands of shells at dummy positions. Wehrmacht units reinforced sectors facing ghost divisions. Meanwhile, 15 miles north, real American soldiers crossed the Rhine against lighter resistance because German resources were committed against illusions. The Ghost Army's greatest victory was that the enemy never realized they'd been deceived. There was no dramatic moment of revelation, no scene where German officers discovered the rubber tanks. They simply fought a battle against an enemy whose strength they'd systematically misjudged, because 23 artists had spent days painting, inflating, and performing an elaborate theater production with life and death stakes. The men of the Ghost Army returned home knowing they'd contributed something unique to victory. They had proven that imagination could be weaponized, that creativity could save lives, that art and warfare were not mutually exclusive. They had turned military deception from occasional improvisation into systematic operation. The inflatable tanks are gone now, mostly destroyed or lost to history. A few survive in museums. The sonic trucks were scrapped decades ago. The recording discs were filed away in archives. But the legacy remains in military doctrine, in deception planning, in the recognition that perception itself can be a battlefield. The Ghost Army fought World War II with paintbrushes and inflatable rudder. They won their battles through imagination and artistic skill. And for 70 years, almost nobody knew they existed.